Let's bring in our political panel. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Philip Bump are here on set. Caitlin is a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, and Philip is a national correspondent for The Washington Post. Welcome.
Good evening.
Hello.
All right, so lots to talk about. The first one, I guess, is a conservative outside group aligned with Speaker Paul Ryan is spending more than $2 million in ads criticizing Obamacare and promoting its repeal. Republicans are concerned that they're losing support for this repealing of Obamacare. What are you hearing?
They should be. Polling suggests that people were always sort of ambivalent about Obamacare, and it usually tracked with politics in the same way that Obama was at about 45-50% by the time he left office. That was because Republicans hated him and Democrats loved him. Obamacare was the same way. But since repeal has actually become a real possibility with a Republican Congress and a Republican president, now people are realizing they may lose this thing. A lot of people quietly enjoyed and liked and appreciated. That's why you're seeing at these town halls people who use Obamacare coming out and saying, don't take this thing away. It's made it a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I read somewhere that somebody joked and said that we're going to repeal Obamacare and we're going to replace it with the Affordable Care Act. I mean,
I'm sure if you ask people, Obamacare versus, people have done that. I was talking to a couple of different outside conservative groups who were really active in the Tea Party earlier today, asking them how they were taking these town halls. Because we heard from the president last night through a tweet that he thinks that these town hall protests are organized, kind of dismiss them and that sort of thing. These outside groups I've been talking to say, no, don't dismiss this kind of energy. This is real. This is similar to what we were showing back then. And back then, Democrats were caught off guard. You heard rhetoric from people like Nancy Pelosi, people from the White House saying, this is not real. This is AstroTurf. This is talking back in 2009. And now you're hearing similar things from this Trump administration. And so these outside groups are now focusing on fighting back against this. So you see those ads. You're also going to see continued, presence to counter at some of these town halls and rallies in Washington next month.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's important to know this was the plan for Democrats. Democrats said, we're going to pass Obamacare. This thing's going to be so popular, you're not going to be able to roll it back. That was always the stipulated plan. Only now are we seeing that come to fruition.
I find it interesting that Republicans, including the president, have sort of pushed back on these constituents going to these town hall meetings and getting in the face of their legislators, because whenever there's any kind of activism, I don't think you could have had the civil rights movement without the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee or the Congress on Racial Equality or any of the other groups that sprouted up to galvanize people, to get them to the polls, to get them to the churches and to the freedom marches and the sit-ins and the boycotts. I don't understand why this has become some kind of a dirty tactic if you listen to some Republicans.
Well, I think from the standpoint of President Trump, he's done everything in his power to try and undercut anyone who's critical of him. He says the news media is the enemy of the American people, right? It is because people who are oppositional to him, he tries to undermine the validity of their concerns. That's why he does it. And I think that sort of trickles down to some extent. But you're absolutely right. There is certainly are progressive groups and Democratic groups that are encouraging people saying, hey, here's when you should go out and talk to your legislator. But that doesn't mean that those people who you see in these videos who are saying, my husband had cancer, there's one of Senator Tom Cotton today, and asking what he's going to do about it, that's a valid concern. She's not being paid to do that.
And people who have said that they have not participated at this level before.
Right.
There is a big question, and people who are driving 2 hours to go to these kinds of things. There's a big question about how Democrats can kind of take advantage of this, right? How to translate this into votes. And when you look at districts that Republicans hold right now, most of them, Trump is still very popular. And so it remains to be seen, whether this kind of thing lasts, right? And that's why Republicans are feeling pressure from some conservatives to get some kind of policy done, to be able to go back to these constituents and say, look, we're doing this and we're doing this, right? Right now they have nothing to sell to them. And so you're going to have, when you're most active, people oppose you.
Well, and it's interesting, one person who's a conservative who agrees with what you are saying, Rich Lowry, writing in the National Review, he wrote this: the partisan temptation in this circumstance is to always dismiss the passion of the other side, which is what Democrats did to their detriment in 2009 and Republicans are doing now. That's That's essentially what you're saying.
Exactly. And so you do have, look, Republicans campaigned on repealing Obamacare, for example, for 7 years, and they won many Republican seats because of it. They now control Congress, and as Philip said, the repeal effort is very real for people. And the thing to remember about healthcare is that it is a very personal issue for people, right? I was talking to a Democratic lawmaker who was wiped out in 2010 because he supported the healthcare law, and he was saying that anytime you introduce some kind of change to healthcare, people react. And so that's what we're seeing now, and that's why there are a lot of parallels between what we're seeing now and what we were seeing then.
I would just note, too, that a lot of this can be misleading. Like Jason Chaffetz in Utah, who had this very, very virulent crowd that was yelling at him. It's several hundred people in a district that's thousands and thousands of people. It's a strongly red district. So I think also legislators know that this is not necessarily a majority of the folks in their district. It's definitely bad optics, but it's 2 years before they're up for re-election, and it's not a majority of the people that actually
they're not worried that the press is now covering these...
Well, they're not excited, don't get me wrong, but they understand that this is not the bulk of their constituency.
And I think it's more of a push for them to get repeal done so that they can come back and say, this is what we did, this is what we changed, this is what we fixed, here you go, here's something for you to have.
Let's talk about another topic here. Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins says she wants former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn to testify in an investigation into Russian meddling in the election. She also said she'd be open to subpoenaing the president's tax returns as part of this investigation to see if he has any financial ties to Russia. How far are Republicans willing to go down this path?
I think it depends on two things. I think it depends on where the path is leading and what they discover about where the path is leading, and I think it depends on where the Republican base is on this. I mean, Susan Collins is a fairly moderate Republican. She is the only person who has voted twice against Donald Trump's cabinet picks, but those cabinet picks have still been confirmed, so she is known as being sort of in the middle ground there, and so I'm not terribly surprised that if anyone were to do this, it would be her. But then again, Senator Marco Rubio has said this is an investigation that we're going to press forward on, and I think that if there are things that are uncovered, that will shift popular opinion about Trump broadly, especially among Republicans, potentially. And in that case, it opens the door wider for Republicans to take action.
Isn't it a risk, though, Caitlin, if Republicans do not investigate this and something comes out? And it comes out that they perhaps knew or they were somehow aware of what the FBI or the NSA was investigating, that could come back to bite them in the rear end.
Yeah, and this is an issue that really kind of is a bipartisan issue, right? It unites Capitol Hill when many things don't. But I think Philip brings up a great point, which is, where does the Republican Party want to go in this? And someone like Susan Collins, is also thinking about perhaps ambitions beyond the Senate, maybe running for governor of Maine, for example. Also, a lot of this stuff will be classified. But you do have from Democrats arguing, trying to find ways to compel Trump to reveal things about himself, right? So they're going to try to find ways to get Republicans on board. They're going to point to this Collins news as kind of a victory of sorts, and to put these pressure points when they're not easily accessible.
Does it make sense, though, if President Trump's base and the people who support him see what is being portrayed as either the unfair media or the unfair Democrats that are just looking at every moment? And look, I know, people are going to say, oh, politicians are hypocritical. We get that because we saw a lot of the same things when it came to President Obama and with Hillary Clinton. But I wonder if it risks also going the other way, where people say, you know what, I don't care. You guys are out to get my guy, and I'm sticking by him.
Well, I always think that Donald Trump's core base of support is always going to be with him. I mean, he even said he could go and shoot people on Fifth Avenue and no one would care. I still think that's true. However, we also have to keep in mind that there were a lot of people that supported Donald Trump that did not like him and he wasn't exactly their first choice.
That's exactly.
Exactly. And so that group, I think we have to kind of start to pay close attention to when we're looking at popularity of Donald Trump and not. And so
just one quick point on that. And that group is moderate Republicans looking at poll data like Susan Collins.
That's a great
they're looking.
point. Exactly.
So as the president, if he continues to slide in the polls, in the national polls, I know within the Republican Party his numbers are still fairly strong, but if his numbers continue to slide in the national polls, moderate Republicans look at that and they say that's a problem.
Well, the moderate Republicans on Capitol Hill do if they're worried about re-election in 2018 in particular, yes. But that's the group. I was just at the point that Caitlin was making. It is not these folks without a college degree, the white folks that came out to vote for Donald Trump overwhelmingly in last November. That's not the folks that he needs to be worried about. It is those people who may have been wavering, may have been sort of.
And he doesn't seem to be interested, at least right now, in expanding beyond that base of those core supporters, right?
He never has, although, and I don't expect any kind of pivot to the presidency, right? And I think if we learned anything from the campaign, exactly. If we learned anything from the campaign, that's it. However, I will say this week we have seen some changes, I would say, coming from the administration. For example, they sent Mike Pence out to the cemeteries today. Right. I think that was an interesting message. Trump has been a little bit more reserved on Twitter, for example.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of waiting to see how much influence people in the White House are having, at least day by day, on kind of toning some kinds of things down. The immigration order, I think, it's going to come next week. They say it was supposed to be coming this week. I think will give some key indication about how they're working with Capitol Hill, how they're working with the cabinet, how things have been streamlined, if they have, in terms of messaging, in terms of approach, and that sort of thing.
Let's play a little bit of what key White House advisor Stephen Miller had to say about that travel ban. Let's play that.
Well, one of the big differences that you're going to see in the executive order is that it's going to be responsive to the judicial ruling, which didn't exist previously. And so those are mostly minor technical differences. Fundamentally, you're still going to have the same basic policy outcome for the country, but you're going to be responsive to a lot of very technical issues that were brought up by the court.
All right. How do you sell a ban with the same, I'm going to use his words, same basic policy outcomes, just some minor differences? There weren't minor differences in the last one that the courts found.
Well, I mean, I think the key word there is sell. Right. I mean, if they are able to craft something which actually passes muster with the courts, which is possible, although it doesn't, if they keep it basically the same as it was, that doesn't seem very likely. But the question is sell, especially now because the takeaway that most Americans have, or at least half of Americans have, of the travel ban was this was a bad thing that was handled poorly. Right. It's going to be hard to get that taste out of people's mouths. And I don't know that they're going to be able to put something forward where people are going to rally around it, particularly because they never effectively made the case this was necessary for America's security. Any analysis that was done of this suggested that this was not going to curtail the sort of folks who we saw actually participate in attacks since September 11th, and actually including September 11th. That's the hurdle they need to get past, that selling.
And in fact, Caitlin, one of the difficulties, I think, is going to be for the White House that many people, including the judiciary, sees this as a Muslim ban because the president has talked about that on the campaign trail and subsequent to his inauguration.
Right, and we saw in that court assessment that your words are used against you, right? Not only Donald Trump, but also Rudy Giuliani, who described the motivation behind this. What's interesting is that polling was split heading into the travel ban, and the execution was the biggest crux of the criticism, right? And so the implementation will be right. But I think Philip brings up a great point, which is that they already kind of screwed this up, right? It is hard to kind of come back without an event that set this in motion in the first place, right? It would be different to kind of create a situation in which you said, we've had this kind of attack, even here or abroad, and say, look, this is what we need to do, this kind of thing. And they just never really messaged around that. Now, that could change. What's different about this time as opposed to last time is that Donald Trump has his cabinet, most of his cabinet members in place. He has someone at DOJ in Jeff Sessions who is confirmed. He has his DHS secretary in place. Those are going to be really key in implementing this.
I have one last question about the fact that many people had called upon the president to denounce what was happening to Jewish community centers, the desecration of a Jewish cemetery. Now, we saw Mike Pence out there today in Missouri. But is it because, and there was that Jewish reporter during that impromptu press conference who tried to ask the president about it, and he pivoted and said, I'm the least anti-Semitic person that you know. Is it because he immediately assumes if you're attacking him or if you're asking him a question, even if it's a valid question, he assumes it's an attack on his legitimacy, and that's what he pivots to. He talks about how popular he is or how not racist he is when he doesn't address simply, it's sort of a layup, isn't it, for a politician to say, we absolutely denounce this. The Holocaust was about the final solution as implemented by the Nazis for the extermination of the Jews. I mean, how hard is that I'm at a loss.
I mean, it is probably one of the easiest things about being president, right? Especially when you've had, 2 or 3 opportunities to hit this out of the park again, right? I do think it is really telling that they sent Mike Pence there today. It also speaks to kind of the role that Mike Pence might play in this administration, that he is seen as an effective communicator, an effective kind of cleanup person. We saw that on the campaign. We're seeing that now in the administration. So I think today, by having the vice president travel to the site, I think is some kind of acknowledgement from the administration that they kind of messed up on this, right? I think if we can look in those terms, I think that's a big takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I mean, I also think it's just that Donald Trump doesn't understand these political things. And he won the presidency, yes, but he's not a politician, right? And what Mike Pence did today is the simple thing that a politician does. And so it's almost as though the administration has Donald Trump who does his stuff. And we've seen this in other circumstances, like when Donald Trump's like, oh, I'm not sure if it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution. Yeah. And then Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, came out and said, no, don't worry, we're still on board. Right? I mean, like, it is the political class that is bolstering Donald Trump, that is playing cleanup for Donald Trump. Yes, I think you're right, that what happens is someone says, I mean, then the Jewish reporter that asked the question said explicitly, I'm not saying you're anti-Semitic. I'm just asking about these attacks, and Donald Trump went sideways on it and told him to sit down and be quiet.
It was an unfair question.
Exactly, because he felt like he was under attack. I think you're exactly right that that's the motivation, and I think that's why the administration is trying to keep him tamped down and at the same time do all the political things with the political actors they have at their disposal.
It'll be interesting to see how sustainable that is going forward.
Yeah.
It's been a week. So far, so good.
Baby steps.
Yeah, exactly. Baby steps, exactly. Philip Bump and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you as always, guys. Appreciate the analysis.